Hi, okay, we are now on page 3 of the purchase contract. We're going to cover section E-1 through F-6. So we begin with E-1, the description of the property. So if you're typing this in on the Zip Forms program, you're probably going to notice that the TMK number will automatically populate into these boxes, and so would the address of the property. You're going to make sure that you check off whether or not it's fee simple or leasehold, and by now you should know which one to select. The next box down here is the description of the property, and a lot of times this is going to be one of the first places that you're going to need to revert back to that other document I explained in a prior tutorial, which is this document here called the Purchase Contract and Counteroffer Standard Contract Terms and Language. And all you would simply do is scroll down to the section that you would like to find the description for. So we've got E-1 description, and you've got several different types of descriptions. So this is a sample contract we're doing for a single family home. So you would go to the single family description. You can either cut and paste this into your Zip Forms document, or as we get a little bit further learning about Zip Forms in general, there is something called a clause editor within Zip Forms where all of these terms that I have in this document are actually in that clause editor, and then you would just simply open up your clause editor, find the description or whatever the language is that you're trying to put into your contract, and simply populate it into your contract. This is just something that I would like you to start with using this document alongside of doing an offer, just so you can kind of get used to seeing it in front of you rather than having to just go into the clause editor. So I would use this for your first 2 or 3 contracts that you're going to do. Be very helpful. Okay, so going back to the purchase contract, you'll see that I already have a description pre-written in here. You would simply put in the number of bedrooms, the number of baths, pop the square footage in here. If it has a garage, a car, 2-car garage, you would put 2-car garage in here, and anything else that you think would be accompanying the property, like if there's something else that's included, like a boat or something like that, you would want to put that into this description. And another thing that you might like to have alongside with you is the MLS printout. So you should have that obviously with you when you're filling out a contract, and you will find that you're going to need to open that up and find the information within it here, like the square footage, bedrooms, baths, whether or not it's furnished. You're going to need to know the name of the agent, because you'll be putting that on the cooperating broker agreement, and whether or not it's tenant occupied. All the information that you're going to need for your offer is going to be on this sheet. So this will be definitely something that you want to have with you. Okay, so that is the description of the property. Now, if you're doing a condo, like I said, there would be a different set of description for that, and in which case you would refer back to your document and you would choose the condo language. So see how that is there. You've got single family language, and then you have condo. All right. Okay, moving along to the next section, which is E2, inclusions. What is included in the property? So by now you've done a walkthrough with your client. You pretty much know what's included, but if you're not sure, you would need to open up your MLS input sheet and go through that looking for what's included. And that's typically down here where it says inclusions: air conditioning, bookshelves, ceiling fan, dishwasher disposal, etc. You'll have this with you while you're filling out the contract, and you would check all that apply. Okay, again, we're going to follow through with that, making sure that you do put something in the box, whether it's an X or NA. It should all be filled out. This section right here where it talks about other, you see how I have 2 automatic garage door remote controls. Where you see here it says automatic garage door, that probably would be checked. I don't know why it's NA, but anyway, if it does have a garage door that would require remote control, you might want to ask for it here, because a lot of times those things get lost and the seller can't find them, and they've moved, maybe they've packed them or something. You want to make sure your client does get those remote controls at closing. So I always like to put it in there. If you see if attached as attached, what does that mean? That means that maybe possibly there could be bookshelves that are included, something that's very special that might be attached to the wall. Sometimes people take their ceiling fans with them. Sometimes they take chandeliers, and you want to make sure there's no confusion that if you've got, it checked here, ceiling fan, if there's something else that's of value that might be attached to the home, you will want to put this language in there so that there's no confusion. And then, of course, if something is attached and the seller does not want to part with it, you might be getting a counter offer for that. I've seen crazy things with someone thinks that something goes with the house and it ends up being taken by the seller. So you just want to make sure you cover yourself there. Okay, sometimes we have things like barbecue grills that are included in the sale. That again, that would be something that might be mentioned in the MLS printout. You want to make sure that it's added here. Okay. Okay, now we get to inventory list, which you don't want to get too crazy with the other line here with what's included, because there could be like a bunch of things included. But if there's more than 2 or 3, you might want to get an inventory list instead of just putting it here. Sometimes people will sell things like a sofa set or maybe a dining table or something like that. If it's just one simple thing, you could probably just put it on this line. But if you've got, more inventory, you're going to want to see a list. And another reason why you want to do an inventory list is that you might go to an open house and the realtor's telling you that this dining set is included, that sofa seat is included, and pointing at all of the things that are included, or might even say everything's included. And then all of a sudden the seller says, I didn't want to sell that bolly head, or I didn't want to sell that chandelier, or whatever. You want to make sure that you get a list from the seller basically verifying all of the things that you believe are being sold with the home. And that's when you would check off inventory list. Now, how do you know if the home is furnished if maybe the realtor didn't mention it? And that would be on the MLS sheet up here, where you would see if it says furnished yes, then you would know to ask for an inventory list. All right. Now, if there is an inventory given to you at the open house, or the realtor says, here it's furnished, here's the list of all the furnishings, and you've already received it, you can just simply say attached, but you need to give your client time to review it. So maybe you got it at the open house, but you want some time to review it. You might want to put a specific period of time here for your client to review it, although it's attached. So if you don't have it, and you want to make sure you give the seller time to prepare it, you wouldn't want to say within, one day of acceptance, because that wouldn't be enough time. They might have a huge list and you might want photos and things like that. So you want to give them plenty of time to provide it. So I'd say typically 5 days would be enough time for a seller to prepare an inventory list. Now, you will want to make sure you give your client plenty of time to review that list, because it could be lengthy, and you want to make sure that maybe when you go in to do the home inspection, you want to have that list with you. You might want to correlate that with the inspection, but typically an inspection is about 14 days. So depending on when you're planning on doing your inspection, you don't want to make this date too long, because the buyer has the opportunity to cancel based on this report. So if the seller sees that you have more than 5 days here, they might not be happy with the time frame there. But again, J1 you can cancel for pretty much anything, so it doesn't really matter. But typically 5 days to review and move forward with the inventory list is plenty of time. Okay. Also, just to let you know that if the seller does not provide the inventory list to buyer within this 5 days, buyer may still cancel. And the reason for that is because, a lot of times when you're selling a multi-million-dollar home and there's a lot of furnishings that are included, those furnishings are very expensive and could potentially create a situation where, like, let's say for example the buyer went in and saw this beautiful furnished home, and all of the furnishings I don't know, equate to somewhere around like maybe $50,000. And then all of a sudden he gets the list and half of the furniture is not included. This could potentially create a problem with the price, in which case the buyer may want to ask for a credit. If he's all of a sudden not getting all the furniture that he thought, he might decide to negotiate on the price again. So this could open up negotiations again. But that inventory list is very important. And again, the buyer may choose to cancel if that inventory that they thought was being sold with the home changes when they see the inventory list. It might be a deal breaker. There might be some things that were included in the sale that the buyer fell in love with the home because of, and they might choose to change their mind. So it's very important that this date somewhat be relatively short so that the seller doesn't freak out thinking you're going to cancel. Okay. Now we go on to exclusions. Now, a lot of times the seller has something of value that he does not want to be included, and whether or not there is an inventory list or not, there might be something that he does not want to sell with the house and wants to make it clear to the buyer that is not being sold with the home. For example, some people have a bond with their furnishings, and maybe there's a chandelier that's attached to the home that they want to take with them. This is their opportunity to tell you, if they tell you that something is excluded, you as a buyer's agent need to make sure you specify that. Again, this is something that you will find on the MLS sheet right around where it says inclusions. So you'll have inclusions and exclusions. If you don't see exclusions on here, there's probably nothing that's being excluded. But of course, if the realtor tells you, yeah, he doesn't want to sell that, that isn't coming with the house, if it's attached to the home, you want to make sure that you do put that in your contract. Okay, if you neglect to do that and it is on the MLS sheet, then you might get a counter offer, at least taking that out. And you kind of want to try to avoid a counter if at all possible. All right. The closing date. Okay, this is an important part of the contract because this is when you're going to be closing on your transaction. So the typical amount of time is about 45 days from acceptance. And the reason why we say 45 days from acceptance, the from acceptance part, is because you don't know when your offer is going to be accepted. So you may provide this offer to the seller agent and then may not hear for 2 or 3 days, or maybe they counter you and then you're going back and forth with a counter offer, and by the time you come to an agreement, it's been about a week and a half. So you don't want to put a date here unless you really need to for some reason. This is the standard language that you would want to put here because let's say, for example, you did put February 28th in this box and today is January 20th, let's say, and that's around 45 days, something like that. Let's say you don't get an acceptance for a week. You just wasted 1 week. And now it's no longer 45 days, it's more along the lines of 30 something days. And if you're doing a loan, that's almost impossible. So it's pretty safe to put in 45 days from acceptance, because once you do get that acceptance, then the clock starts ticking. So let's say you put 45 days from acceptance and the offer is actually accepted on January 27th. Then the clock starts ticking from the day that you have an acceptance, if that makes sense. All right. Other things to consider are, making sure that you don't calculate this where it would fall on a weekend or a holiday. If you've got a short month and you've got holidays in there, your 45 days could rapidly change to 40 days and cut some even more time off of there. So something to be aware of. All right. Going down to F3, extensions. This is where you would put in the amount of days that you would like to have if you should require an extension. Extensions are usually used for things such as the loan. The lender didn't quite make it with the 45 days and he needs like another 5 or 6 days to prepare documents, something like that. You want to try to at least give your client an extension in here should anything happen that they're not able to fix, you know what I mean? So the lender says, okay, we cannot make closing, we need another 2 or 3 days. You would then invoke your right to extend. There's no automatic right to extend, meaning that just because they didn't get their furniture in the truck on time, that kind of thing may not, it has to be reasons beyond your control. I mean, you really have to have a really good reason. But one thing to consider here is that the seller does not have to approve it as long as you provide some sort of written explanation about why you need to extend, whether it be a loan or be maybe your travel situation caused you to delay in the closing, maybe signing documents or something. As long as you provide the written documentation to the seller, you can utilize that extension. Uh, I've never had any problem with this. Usually the seller is okay with it unless you keep doing it. And 7 days isn't really a lot of time, but a seller is going to look at this and say, how long could you potentially extend this? If you put, like, 20 days in here, they're going to probably, a red flag, want to know why you want so long. Um, Typically a seller side will see 7 to 10 days. That's usually pretty normal and wouldn't set off any red flags. But you want to be careful to when you're plugging in the timing on this to make it sort of short. Okay, because the idea is not to have to use the extension unless you absolutely have to, and depending on the seller and their moving situation, you don't want to spring this on them and have them wait another 2 weeks to close. But sometimes it happens. So if you do get up to the seventh day of an extension and you require more time, it could potentially cause your buyer to be out of contract. So you got to be careful with that too. So if you feel that 7 days is too short and you're worried about the loan, you might want to consider putting a longer time in there, because you could be putting your buyer into a pickle at the end of the escrow, I'm sorry, at the end of the loan. If you don't give him enough time, he would be forced to close. But again, if they can't get the loan, there's no obligation to close on the buyer side. But if it had something to do with moving or anything to do with a job related situation, they could be in default of the contract if they don't adhere to closing within this extension period. Okay, time of the essence. That is the absolute opposite of an extension, meaning that if you say 45 days from acceptance and you have a calculated date, you have to close by that time. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You don't have any extension unless something happens and you could convince the seller to agree to an extension. Otherwise, they could force you to close. Uh, that would probably not be wise to do if you are doing a loan, because it's almost, I mean, it's very typical and likely that you would probably need a couple days extension. It happens all the time. So I would never check this box if you're doing a loan. This would be a perfect thing to do if you're doing a cash deal. This would make your offer very strong, because then you have like a concrete deadline to close, no chance of extension, and it's a cash deal. You don't have to deal with any lenders involved. So that would be a good thing to check if you were doing a cash transaction. All right. But the reason why we do extensions here is because we're factoring a typical transaction, single family home with a loan. You would want to make sure you put in an extension. Okay, so for the escrow, this would be whatever escrow company you want to work with. A lot of times agents feel that they want to use a company that they're comfortable with. We do like to work with Fidelity National Title because they do a lot of our marketing for us, and we like to shoot them business. But as a contractual situation and legal aspect part of this, I like to just tell you at this point that you really should be asking your client who they want to use for escrow. That should be the first question. If they say, who cares, I don't, whatever, whoever you like, whatever, then you go to your favorite escrow officer and Fidelity National Title if you choose to use them. But I think it would be best for you to ask your client first if they have anyone that they like to work with, because a lot of times they have friends, family members that are in escrow that would possibly give them a discount. Not only that, but you don't want to refer the escrow company and then the escrow company, totally screw up. Then it's going to come back to haunt you. So it's always good to give your clients a couple referrals if they don't know anybody, or at least give them the chance to tell you who they want to use. It's also possible that this could get countered, because in today's market, sellers when they counter you back, they may counter your escrow officer. We like to just try to say, if you want to make the deal happen, unless you've got a really good deal with a discount with the escrow company, go with whatever the seller wants to do. sometimes you'll also notice that on the MLS sheet, it will say in the remarks to use a specific escrow company, and you might see that somewhere around here where it'll say please use Fidelity National Title. And if that is in the MLS and you want to make your offer strong, you should probably put it, unless you have a really good reason not to. That would be my recommendation. Okay, so moving along to F5, prorations and closing adjustments. And they pretty much have it all right here. There really isn't much more that could be prorated, but there might be something specific that you do know about. You would want to put it on this line. Anything that you think would need to be adjusted or prorated, maybe some sort of deposit or rent, that kind of thing. We just put standard term any other just in case something does come up in the transaction. You're covered with that. Okay, and F6 closing costs. This actually does extend to the next page, which we're going to cover on the next tutorial, but F6 goes into what's covered, buyer and seller typical percentages of escrow fees, but we're going to cover that in the next tutorial. Okay, so that concludes page 3 of the purchase contract, and I will talk to you on the next tutorial.